As the human race struggles in this unprecedented era against COVID-19, we must remember that although there is isolation, there should not be loneliness. Although there is quarantine, there should not be any fear. This is also an inevitable yet transformational moment. The key is to remain focused on what we can control. So choose calm over worry. Welcome to my channel, Rendezvous with Reena. Quiet the mind for only a few seconds and you'll be surprised at what you hear. What is the picture all about? It's asking us to keep quiet. So today we'll be reading a poem which has gained a lot of prominence in this COVID era. And you guessed it right, it's Keeping Quiet by Ricardo Elisa Nefalti Riaspas Alto, popularly known as Pablo Neruda. He's a Chilean poet, diplomat, politician who earned a lot of fame due to his love poems and political writings. He has been called the greatest poet of the 20th century and went on to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. The main theme of the poem is necessity of quiet introspection and creating a feeling of mutual understanding amongst human beings. It also talks about the horrors of war and how they affect world peace. So the poem discusses the need for maintaining peace and silence. It stresses upon being quiet and harmless to human beings, animals, and environment around us. It suggests that in order to maintain peace and harmony, it is required to stop and introspect ourselves. In this poem, the poet visualizes a state of comfortable inertia where he wishes for pleasant idleness and relaxation away from the frantic rat race, destructive activities, and futile war. He wishes for a profound silence and stillness that would elevate the sadness caused by the lack of self-understanding and the threat of self-destruction, and which would build up a sense of togetherness. The poem is written in free verse and does not follow any rhyme scheme. So let's begin the poem. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. The poet begins with counting up to 12, urging everyone to be still. He chose 12 for several reasons. 12 hints at 12 hours of a day which rule our life. 12 refers to the zodiac signs believed to be controlling forces. 12 could also refer to 12 months of a year, and if you believe in numerology, it's a digit of peace and prosperity. 12 even may be aimed for preparing for all of us to be ready to plunge into a state of silence. The poetic devices used over here are alliteration. There is repetition of a consonant sound in the phrase "we will." Count to 12 is symbolism. It symbolizes measure of time. Now the poet further says, "For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much." The poet wants everyone to stop and calm down. He urges everyone not to speak in any language. As we all know, there are different languages spoken in different parts of the earth, but which sometimes becomes barrier on our way to peace. And not only this, he also wants people to stop moving their arms. So arms could refer to the physical arms of the human being, which are often used for destructive purposes. Arms could also refer to the weapons which are being used by different countries to wage war against each other. So basically, the poet is demanding peace from all of us. We can also say that the poet advocates the importance of silence and self-introspection, with which we can transform not only the life of an individual but also the face of the earth. The poetic devices used over here are: firstly, anaphora. Let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second is anaphora. There's also repetition used over here with the word let's to create a bond with the readers and stress his point. The poet further says, it would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We would all be together in sudden strangeness. The poet says, we are always on a move. We are always busy accomplishing our work and go on rushing in our lives. And he urges everyone to stop their personal activities and even asks engines to stop. So engines here refers to the industrial work causing harm to the environment. And he asks everyone to unite in one tune of silence, because he declares silence is exotic. And this silence will make us blissful and bring complete equilibrium. The poet says, it does not take much time to look within and examine oneself. It will take only as long as it takes to count till 12. And during this time of self-introspection, we should all keep quiet, as it will evoke strange feelings of togetherness. So self-introspection, self-observation is very important, as it is a kind of a check on self-development and which will help us to know what we have achieved so far and help us to examine our own ideas and thoughts. The poetic devices used over here are alliteration we see in the phrase we would, sudden strangeness, it's a repetition of those consonant sounds. And we also see anaphora in the phrase without rush, without engines. Moving further, the poet says, fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt but look at his hurt hands. Those refers to the politicians, the statesmen, and the scientists who are involved in initiating and aggravating wars. The poet here condemns the people who have been waging wars with gas, wars with fire, wars against nature. The poet mocks at the people who get victory over destruction. He urges them to be positive in their outlook and constructively involve themselves. He further asks them to put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers doing nothing, meaning indulge in self-introspection and not engage themselves in destructive and negative activities. He calls everybody to adopt a new approach towards life and mankind. He earnestly desires people to be apostles of peace and harmony in the world and promote love, mutual respect, and spirit of togetherness. The poetic devices used over here are alliteration in the phrase wars with clean clothes. We also see the use of assonance with the vowel O. Victory with no survivors, would put on clean clothes, walk about with their brothers. So these phrases have assonance. Brothers here is symbolic of
mankind. We also see the use of metaphor in the phrase put on clean clothes. In the shade is metaphor. And the poet goes on to say, what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. The poet here says that his message of silence should not be confused with total inactivity or inertia. He further clarifies that his message does not have any affinity with death. Rather, it is aimed at the way of living. Activity is the very essence of life, but for a fresh, better and useful activity, a little stillness is essential. So the poet makes us understand that he only wants us to interrupt the sad, cruel and threatening activities of the world for a few moments and make the people introspect their actions. That is, to ponder upon their acts and realize the results of their deeds. He wants us to stop for a while and feel the calmness so that positive introspection is done. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead, the later proves to be alive. Poet says that we human beings are single-minded. We are always busy in achieving our goals, completing personal responsibilities, and we never stop for a while to evaluate ourselves and understand ourselves. The poet urges us to stop for a while and take some moment to relish on what we have achieved till date. The expression huge silence might interrupt the sadness means if we will stop for a while and see what we have achieved till date, it will help us skip the sadness which has become so prominent in our lives. That is the sadness of not enjoying what we have achieved in the fear of death and in a greed to achieve most of the things before our death. The expression, perhaps the earth can teach us as when everything seems dead, later proves to be alive. So the poet uses the image of the earth to suggest that human beings should learn a lesson from the earth. In winter, the earth becomes so still and silent that it seems to be dead. But later in spring, it seems to be lively again. It has new beauties and colors added to it. Everything present in the nature, such as the trees, the birds, the rivers, etc., get new life. Similarly, after a little quietness and silence, man can resume his activities in a fresh and a better manner. Just like all the creations of the nature undergo a rebirth with the change of season, similarly, keeping quiet will be rebirth for human soul. It will give a new meaning to our life. So by giving the example of nature, the poet here wants to say that all human beings should stop and try to judge their deeds. Now I will count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go. So finally he ends up by saying that now he will count up to 12 so that we all may become quiet. Quiet here means introspect ourselves and move towards the path of peace and prosperity.